Well, here I am cycling on the Black Rove Road, which runs from Wadston Crossroad up to Pitchcott. I've just passed Quainton Crossroads, but the road I'm interested in is just around here on the left. Pitchcott is about a mile up the road. So if we turn left here, we're entering Carter's Lane. Well, that's what we call it now. Probably more history in this one lane than almost any road around here combined. But to have a proper look at this, let's look at the map first. This is the Ordnance Survey map showing Carter's Lane, which I've arrowed in red. As you can see, the map clearly marks it as a Roman road. It runs north from the junction with Black Rove Road, and at the top it makes a sharp right-hand turn to North Marston. Right, so this is a Roman road, as we saw on the map. What the Romans would have called a Via Rustica, or country road, probably privately built by whoever owned the land it ran through, and a regulation width of 8 Roman feet, which is about 2.7 metres. The Roman bit is on the right hand side here. Anything added later is tending to fall away. You can see it quite clearly in places. Yeah, this is the Roman bit. Don't know if you can make out, everything to the left of me is dropping away. Very wide verges, and on the left is a parish boundary between Pitchcott and Quainton, and it's typical of parish boundaries: a double hedge and a very deep ditch, sometimes 2 ditches. So this is a very significant boundary. This road would have been built for light traffic, pedestrians and horse-drawn carts, and would have linked the township of what is now Fleet Marston on the Akerman Road, the A41, with the temple and shrine complex at Thornborough, and further up to Towcester, which was a garrison town. So quite an important little road, although not a major artillery road, not a major arterial road like Akerman Street. But these wide verges also lent themselves very well to a couple of other purposes, and one of those was droving cattle. Cattle drovers came across the country from Wales, the Cotswolds, to bring their beef stock to market, and they had to walk them, you know, where there wasn't any motorised transport back in the day, so they were walked up here by drovers, quite large herds of cattle, and they obviously made quite slow progress. So it was useful having these big wide verges for the cattle to graze on as they walked. So this is fairly typical of a drover's road. But these wide verges were also quite useful for living on, and there was for many years quite a sizable vagrant community living along this lane. In fact, locally it's also known as Gypsy Lane, because many of these vagrants were Romany gypsies. And you can imagine these verges were perfectly wide enough to settle quite a few people. So we have drovers and gypsies. The gypsies left one mark. We'll just have a look at it now. And here it is, in the side of the road. It's known as the Gypsy Stone. This marks a grave, although probably not here, we think it's been moved, of a chap called Edward Boswell, the so-called King of the Gypsies, who was hanged for horse thieving in 1641. And a few days after being hanged, his body was cut down from the gibbet in Aylesbury and brought by his friends, who were all living up here, of course, where he was buried. We don't know exactly where, because this stone's definitely been moved. But this is a Gypsy stone, and this is pretty well the only legacy we've got from the community of gypsies that lived here. Now, why they came to live here is another story, which I'll go into a bit later. But let's carry on with our journey up the lane. Now, for many years, this was the main road from Aylesbury to Buckingham, because prior to the 18th century, there was no toll road, there was no A413, and so anyone travelling from Thame, Oxford, Aylesbury to Buckingham had to come up here. So there were coaches coming up here. Hard to imagine, but this was the main road. In fact, in some places it's called the London Road. Here, let this truck past. Here we can see the lovely wide verges again, either for gypsies or for drovers. We're now approaching the parish boundary, so this is the edge of Pitchcott. To our left is still Quainton, but to our right, this hedges and trees marks the boundary of North Marston parish. So as soon as we pass this line of trees, we are actually in North Marston. So the boundary to my left is now the parish boundary between Quainton and North Marston. Again, still a very deep ditch and a hedge. Look at the width of this verge. You have a lot of people living on there, a lot of vagrants. parish boundary, you're unlikely to be troubled by officialdom, because vagrancy in years gone by was a very serious offence indeed. Right, we're nearing the crest of the hill that Carter's Lane has been climbing steadily for a couple of miles, and we return to the drover's story. Because the drovers, as I said earlier, were walking quite slowly, with beasts that aren't designed to travel long distances. So they have to stop quite regularly for food, but most importantly for water. One of the stop points, or hostels, was just here on the right. It's now called Stonehill Farm, or Stonehill Farm, but this was almost certainly a drover's rest stop. And on the left here is believed to have been one of the areas where they kept the cattle overnight. So they would have stayed in that building on we've just passed, and the cattle would have stayed in here behind the fence, because their onward journey is up here. Because although the road now turns sharp right to North Marston, originally, and certainly in the Roman days, it went straight down there, what is now known colloquially as Dead Man's Lane. So that's where the road went. But let's go back to the drovers. So there's their cattle penned in there, having walked probably 5 or 6 miles between rests. The cattle were shod, by the way. They put little tin plate shoes on the hooves, stop them wearing out. So that's the assumed place where they kept the cattle, but my view is it's a much better place just around here. This area to the left, this verge to the left, to me is a much more sensible place to keep cattle. Look at the width of it. But more importantly is what we have down here. Because here be water. This is a brook which marks the boundary with Ogshaw and Fullbrook parish, but it would have been an ideal spot for cattle to take on water, because the brook itself isn't just at the end of the lane, it loops around, so that the cattle have got access to the water for quite a way past this tree. The water itself runs down from Quainton Hill over to our right now, and was obviously an important source of water, not just for the cattle, but as we shall see soon, for another community. So you can imagine all the cattle penned in here against the fence, which runs down to the brook, and then when they finished they were herded back up towards the hostel, and then turn left and down Dead Man's Lane. We're going to carry on along here because I've mentioned this vagrant community a number of times, and they've got to start it somewhere. It seems a bit odd you just suddenly have a community of vagrants or gypsies showing up and deciding to camp somewhere, although it's not beyond the realms of possibility. But I've got a theory, and my theory is based on what happened to a community of people that used to live just down here, a place called Fullbrook Village. Right, this large open area in front of us on both sides of the road was technically where it was sited. Let's have a look at a map and see what the map tells us. This is the Ordnance Survey map which shows Fullbrook Farm. It shows the site of a medieval village to the left of the road just before you get to the farm, and it shows in the field adjacent to the farm a range of different earthworks, one of which is labelled as Moat at the very top. Now, one of the odd things about what's on the map is it seems to suggest the abandoned village or deserted village of Fullbrook was in this patch of land to our left, and sure enough, if you look, you can see all sorts of humps and lumps and gullies and things, but not what I expect to see. What I expect to see are clumps of nettles. Nettles are telltale plants. They're indicators of ground disturbance and masonry and mortar. But if you look to the right, what do we see up on the hill there? Masses of nettle clumps, which suggests to me that's where the village was. Let's have a look at some satellite pictures to see what they tell us. At first, the satellite image isn't as clear as one would hope. You can just make out the clusters of nettles almost randomly arranged across the field, although there are some linear features which are of particular interest. If you convert the image to black and white and then invert it to create a negative image, the clumps of nettles show up as white blobs, which makes them much easier to see. If you then use lines to join up the linear arrangements of the nettle clumps, you can start to see some shapes forming that would have been the walls of the buildings in the village. And these buildings would not have been very dissimilar to this. This is a typical 15th century cottage. It's timber frame with wattle and daub walls, a thatched roof, and it's sitting on a stone plinth, which is very important because it's the stone from the stone plinth which leaves the traces which become nettle beds. Now if we go down towards what is now Fulbrook Farm, we shall see other signs of settlement. Fulbrook Farm basically occupies part of the footprint of Fulbrook Manor that was built there hundreds of years ago. And Fulbrook Manor was a moated manor, as was the custom in the time it was built. And there, look, more nettles, nettle clumps on a moated site. You can see hopefully see the building platform rising above the moat, and all the way along clumps of nettles. So my view is this is the extent of the manor or its outbuildings. It came right the way down here, went up beyond what is currently the farm, and in fact on some of the early maps there is a church marked just to the north of the farm at the bottom of the hill there, which makes sense. It would have been a manorial church. And also of course the church for this little village up there, living in their timber frame houses, and all would have been well. They would have worked the fields around here, open fields with ridge and furrow, some of which you can still see from satellite, and everything went hunky-dory until another group of people got involved, and they are the Knights Hospitallers, and they had a thing called a commandery, or a sort of preceptory or centre, just down the road there, about a mile and a bit, a place called Hogshaw. And they weren't a wealthy community, a religious community, and towards the end of the 15th century they realised that money was in sheep, in wool, not in arable farming. So they decided, unfortunately for this community, to take over quite a big parcel of land and fence it in for pasture for sheep. And 60 acres of that land was here. It's what's known as 2 vergates, about 60 acres. So this lot was basically cleared and fenced and ditched, and this lot who lived here had to go somewhere, had to get off the land. It probably was a gradual process. We think it started about 1485, certainly was pretty well all over by 1510. So these people had to move out around about 1500. They were looking for somewhere else to go. They wouldn't have wanted to go too far because their church and community had been based here. They would have wanted to stay within sight almost of the church, because presumably lots of their forebears are buried somewhere up there where the church is, or was. So my guess is they would have upped sticks, literally taken what they could salvage from their properties and moved up the road to what was a fairly safe area on the edge of the parish boundary. But their houses, as we saw from the image earlier, were based on stone plinths, And it's the stone that was left, or disturbance of that stone, that left us with these telltale signs, these nettles, and also gave us the opportunity to see the linear pattern created by the nettles that almost makes out the form of some of the buildings that were here. So off they went up the road to form a vagrant community, which was later supplemented by Romanies, by the Gypsies, and the Gypsies particularly were there until, within the last 20 or 30 years there have been Gypsies in the lane. So that lasted 400 or 500 years, that community, in some shape or form. But I'm pretty sure this is where it all started, here at Fallbrook Village. Again, if you look over on the land on this side, very, very few nettle clumps. What we have here is a medieval water system. They're diverting water from the brook that we passed earlier on to create fish ponds, as well as top up the moats, presumably. And these earthworks are really just all that's left from those fish ponds. And of course they probably wouldn't have wanted to put sheep on here because of the nature of the land. But over here was a different proposition. This is clearly a nice place to graze sheep, as indeed sheep still graze here to this day. It's just a theory, but it seems to hang together to me.